great honor. I really don't think I deserve it, but I'm grateful anyway. And thank you for coming. Now to the task at hand. Over the years, I have felt that there are three questions that must be addressed in any interreligious discussion. Also, there are preliminary issues that form the context of these questions and shape the basis of the dialogue process. And before I discuss the preliminaries, however, let me first set forth the three basic questions. They are, first, how can I be true to my faith without being at the same time false to yours? Second, what is the place of the faith of the other within the context of the self-understanding of my own faith perspective? That is, what space or recognition do I give to the other from the perspective of my own faith? And third, and finally, how can religions work together for the common good of humanity? Those are the three foundational, fundamental questions that any dialogue process have to consider. Now, over the years, I have come to the realization that it is the very process of dialogue, paradoxically, that is of essential importance in interreligious communication. The process of dialogue consists of establishing a proper atmosphere for effective dialogue. It is the attitude of the participants and the way in which they respond to one another, which sets the proper stage for discussion, regardless of the topics to be discussed. If people are not ready to talk, or if there's a lack of trust, mutuality, or respect, then genuine dialogue cannot take place. In his many writings and speeches, Father Remy Hochman, who taught here, has convincingly shown us that if a dialogue process is characterized by a sense of trust and care, then a whole range of issues, including theological issues, that initially no one even would think of discussing, may gradually be included. It seems to me that unless we're willing to be respectful and caring of one another and ask the other to express his or her fundamental convictions, we're not engaging in the kind of dialogue that produces results required for proper understanding and harmonious relationships. By investigating areas of agreement and diversity, not just agreement, but diversity, we will not only learn how to recognize one another in ways that are not subject to the all too frequent stereotyping and distortions of the past, but indeed to recognize one another, see one another in new and accurate ways. The great sage Hillel enjoined us not to judge our fellow human being until you stand in his or her place. What I believe he meant is that it is not enough to just put yourself in another person's place, in another person's shoes, or experience the world through that person's categories, through their feelings, their hopes and fears. One must do something more. One must look at oneself with the eyes of the other. How do you look to him? With what eyes do you see me? In genuine dialogue, there's an openness to depths of oneself and depths of the other that neither had any real awareness or knowledge of eliciting in its initiation. I would go so far as to agree with David Lockhead, who claims that dialogue, quote, is a way of knowing truth that neither party possesses prior to the dialogue. In any process of communication, one must order the content of the communication in relation to the respective value framework of the participants. Generally, if something is very important and central to us, we mistakenly assume that it must also be very important and central to the other. This is not necessarily true. What may be of central importance to one faith tradition may be of secondary importance or interest to the other. In addition, similar expression, terms, or concepts have very different associations or significance in Judaism and Christianity. Further, other religions differ from my own should make me consider the possibility that I may not have the full truth, and especially that the other may have something to teach me. It is presumptuous for us to maintain that the great religions of the world, which have been a source of inspiration and hope for millions of individuals with great religious teachers, have no insight to offer us. So, dialogue is needed to present a more objective and historically accurate view of one another. One cannot deny that if one were to look at Christian attitudes towards Jews and Judaism, and Jewish attitudes towards Christians and Christianity, one would often see negative stereotypes and false representations. Past misunderstandings must be clarified, and we must take a new direction in the way we view one another. Thanks to the great achievement of Vatican II, with the document Nostra Aetate, the guidelines, the notes, the papal speeches, the We Remember document, the European bishop statements, the Israel-Vatican Accord, and the biblical document, much of the past negativity has been completely overcome. By far the most revolutionary document which has been treated as having the equivalence of a dogmatic statement is the Declaration Nostra Aetate. What the Declaration Nostra Aetate did with respect to Jews and Judaism can be summarized in 2 points. First, the re-examination of the relationship between the Church and Judaism and the Jewish people, the movement from a theology of a dead and outdated and superseded Judaism to a theology of a living Judaism. Second, a rejection of all forms of anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism as in any way founded on Christian or scriptural teaching. That the Vatican Council's Declaration Nostra Aetate was of decisive importance can be seen from the evaluation of Cardinal Willebrands, the first president of the Pontifical Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. Let me quote what he says. "Never, I repeat, never, had a systematic, positive, comprehensive, careful, and daring presentation of the Jews and Judaism been made in the Church by a pope or a council. This should never be lost sight of." Cardinal Willebrands also says, "The last and decisive vote on October 28th was positive beyond all expectations. Only 250 negative votes, 1,763 votes in favor, and 10 abstentions. It is important to note," he says, Cardinal Willebrands says, "that the Church, through her bishops, was united on the question of how to relate to Jews and Judaism, not torn apart by it. And this has been and remains the solid guarantee of the changed, renewed attitude towards Jews and Judaism in the Catholic Church." Pope John Paul, referring to the Declaration Nostra Aetate, gave it the highest level of authority in the Church. It's a pity that this statement that I'm reading now, which was first pointed out to me by Remy Huckman, and came in the Osservatore Romano of January 29, 1985, it's not in his spiritual pilgrimages. He said to the Jewish representatives of the Jewish community of Venezuela, this is what Pope John Paul said, "I wish to confirm," and now listen to this because this is extraordinarily important, "I wish to confirm with utmost conviction, con toda mia profunda convicción, that the teaching of the Church proclaimed during the Second Vatican Council in the Declaration Nostra Aetate remains always for us, for the Catholic Church, for the Episcopate, and for the Pope, a teaching not only which must be followed, a teach which it is necessary to accept, not merely as something fitting, but much more as an expression of the faith, as an inspiration of the Holy Spirit, as a word of the divine wisdom." That's what John Paul II said in speaking about Vatican II. A remarkable and outstanding statement. So getting back to the basic questions that I had spoken of above, for dialogue to be fully effective, Christians and Jews must first ask the fundamental question, how can I be true to my faith without being false to yours? This means that one should strive to understand the other as he or she understands oneself. One must be able to understand one's faith without distorting or denigrating the other. There's no reason for us not to be completely true to one's faith without having to distort or denigrate the other. Indeed, let me tell you, it was Saint Pope John the 23rd who himself stated that the only way that I can be true to my faith, the only way to be true to one's faith, is by being true to the faith of the other. It is part of being true to one's faith not to distort and denigrate and not be true to the faith of the other. When the Pope first met with members of the Jewish community, this is Pope John Paul II, he asked that Jews make an effort to understand Christians and Christianity. After establishing the indissoluble connection for Christians between Judaism and Christianity, the Pope then gave full assent to the guidelines prologue, which asked Christians to strive to acquire a better knowledge of the basic components of the religious tradition of Judaism. The Pope said, Christians must strive to learn by what essential traits the Jews define themselves in the light of their own religious experience. However, the Pope emphasized that as essential as it is for Christians to understand Jews and Judaism, especially in terms which they define themselves, it is equally necessary for Jews to understand the Church and Christians in terms in which they also define themselves. It's very interesting that the Pope said this, yes, we're here to do the best we can to understand you properly, but you have to take upon yourself the commitment to really do your best to understand us properly. It's unfortunate that the first part has always been quoted, but the second part, where the Pope asks the Jewish community to understand Christians properly, has been rarely, if ever, quoted. Now, in order to obtain the high level of understanding and trust, there have been enormous and continuous efforts on the part of the Catholic Church to be sensitive to the feelings and concerns of the Jewish community. Beginning with Nostra Aetate, the subsequent documents and actions, St. Pope John Paul II has produced a revolution. Now, the Pope did not believe, I can say this because I had the great privilege on at least 3 occasions to have a meeting with Pope John Paul II that lasted well over 20 and 30 minutes. In our first meeting, it was 45 minutes. In other meetings in Denver, it was close to 30 minutes. In New York, it was even close to an hour. He did everything he could to publicize these new changes. In fact, he didn't believe the documents were enough, that actions had to take on these teachings and make them knowledge. Therefore, the promulgation of the new Universal Catechism, which imported much of the new developments as well as initiated the process and completion of full diplomatic accord between Israel and the Holy See, but he personally took dramatic, highly publicized steps to concretize these changes. Don't minimize them. His visit to the synagogue in Rome was heralded around the world, as well as his ceremony of repentance for the second millennium, where, in fact, his placing the prayer of forgiveness in the wall in Israel. These were all outstanding actions that the Pope took. I hope I can be permitted to tell a story. I may have told it to some of you before, but let me repeat it. It just so happened that right after the Pope went to the synagogue in Rome, I happened to be visiting the president of my congregation, and her brother was there. And the brother said, you know, a very strange thing happened just recently. And they said, well, what was it? He said, well, I got in the mail a little package, and in the package was a chemistry set for a 10-year-old. And then I couldn't believe, how could I have gotten the chemistry set from for a 10-year-old? So he looked and he says, it was my mother that sent it to me. And she said, my gosh, she must be getting senile. So what he did is he called her. By the way, he was 65, she was 90. He says, did you send me that chemistry set? And she said, yes, of course I sent you that chemistry set. don't you know what happened when you wanted that chemistry set when you were 10 years old? He said, I remember that I wanted a chemistry set, but I don't remember what anyone said. He says, well, your father said to you, when the Pope comes to shul, I'll give you a chemistry set. When the Pope goes to the synagogue. So the Pope went to synagogue, so you're going to get a chemistry set. Now, there are three questions, I must say, that have been stumbling blocks in the Jewish-Christian dialogue. And the interesting thing is that in every single one of these questions, the Catholic Church has acted admirably, valiantly, and courageously. First, anti-Judaism and the Holocaust. Second, a proper recognition of the place of Israel. And third, the issue of missionizing. With respect to anti-Judaism, the Pope and Cardinal Cassidy have produced exemplary results. Anyone familiar with the Pope's statements during his pontificate, whenever he had to address the Jewish community, he always spoke with such care and love and affection and compassion for the suffering of the Jews. In fact, when he spoke to the Jewish community in Warsaw, he says, be sure, dear brothers, that the Poles, this Polish church, is in a spirit of profound solidarity with you when she looks closely at the reality of the extermination, the unconditional extermination of your people, an extermination carried with premeditation. And then to summarize, because it's a long statement, he said, you have become a warning cry to all of humanity. And therefore, this is your mission in the world today, to be a witness against the extermination of individuals as a result of hatred and vengeance. And it was Cardinal Cassidy in Prague in 1990 who made public repentance on the part of the Church for her past acts of anti-Judaism, requesting forgiveness from the Jews for any wrongs perpetrated on them. He said that anti-Semitism has found a place in Christian thought and practice, calls for an act of tshuva, that is repentance, change. Tshuva, by the way, in Hebrew means a new direction. And of reconciliation on our part as we gather here in this city, which is a witness to our failure to be authentic witnesses to our faith at times in the past. And what can we say about Pope Francis? A pope who not only wrote a book with a rabbi when he was a cardinal, a book which clearly dealt with the Shoah, claiming, quote, that every Jew was killed was a slap against the living God in the name of idols. He participated in memorial services for the 6 million. He also declared as Pope that no good Catholic can be an anti-Semite. He went to Israel embracing the Jewish state as a valid representation of the Jewish people. What better can you get than that in terms of trying to recognize the Jews as they recognize themselves and be responded to the valid concerns of the Jewish people? Now, regarding the place of Israel in Jewish identity, it was Pope John Paul II who proclaimed, remarkably, that he said, for the Jewish people who live in the state of Israel and who preserve in that land such precious testimonies to their histories and their faith, we must ask for the desired security and due tranquility that is the progressive of every nation and condition of life and of progress for every society. When it comes to anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism, when it asks for asking forgiveness of the Jews for acts of anti-Judaism, in terms of the We Remember document, which actually deals with the issue of the Holocaust, no group anywhere has produced the same kind of sensitivity and understanding of the condition and the plight of the Jew as the Catholic Church. And we have to acknowledge it, and we have to be grateful for it. Now, with respect to missionizing, this has been and continues to be a very troubling problem for Jews. Let me say that I myself addressed this question some years ago when the Southern Baptists in the U.S. declared conversion of the Jews to be a priority. And they put millions of dollars into going around to convert Jews. The first thing I did, which by the way, they were very unhappy that I did it, I'm saying my people, the Jewish people, what I did, I said, why don't we have a conference and let's discuss it? Why don't you tell us why you want to convert us? Okay? So we had a conference, and I invited also Catholics and mainline Protestants. And here's what I said to the Baptists. I said, the Holocaust was a devastating experience for the Jewish people. Almost 40% of the Jews were killed. More Jews than live in the United States, more than all of those who live in the land of Israel. Also, it was not a matter of sheer numbers, but the greatest and most important centers of Jewish learning perished with them. The great learning of the rabbinical schools and the great contribution of Jewish and European culture that the Jews had and made was a devastating loss. I asked the Baptists, and I must say that I think they listened to some extent. I asked them, would it be so terrible if the Jewish people, an ancient people, would continue to exist? Why not let the Jews continue to study their sacred texts and be nourished by them? Continue to renew and deepen their understanding of their tradition, as it were an enlarged autobiography of the Jewish people. When Goethe says, "He who cannot give an account to himself of 3,000 years, may he stay in darkness, inexperienced may he live from day to day." We have our own biography of more than 3,000 years. What would be the benefit to anyone for this heroic, tragic, and sublime biography which has nourished so many to end? Is it not possible that Judaism should continue to be a significant voice in the orchestra of humankind? And in speaking to Catholic groups, especially with the help of Angelicum, giving this Holocaust menorah, which we gave to the Pope and to others, I often said to Catholic groups, imagine in Catholic terms, if of the billion Catholics that exist, 400 million were killed in a period of a few years. The Vatican demolished, its great universities, including this one, devastated. Think of what this would mean. Just think. Fortunately, the cessation of active missionizing on the part of the Catholic Church has been stated by Cardinal Cassidy, Cardinal Casper, and most explicitly reaffirmed by Cardinal Koch in his recent statement celebrating the 50 years of Christian-Jewish dialogue. Now, the second question is, what is the place of Jews and Judaism in a Christian self-understanding? And what is the place of Christians and Christianity in a Jewish self-understanding? And here's what I think one has to think. It's not enough, please listen to what I say. It's not enough for the state to provide civil rights. The Jew must also be granted religious rights. It is the religion that grants religious rights to the other religion. Because if we depend on the state, it is very, very precarious. Let me quote Hermann Cohen here with great insight. This is what he said. Neither the Enlightenment nor modern legislation has succeeded in removing from the Jews the burden placed upon them by the prejudice that they represent nothing but a foreign race. This prejudice can and will disappear only when the inherent worth of their religion is fully recognized. And here again, the Catholic Church has led the way. And I can only say that I'm profoundly grateful for this. I have a section here on how the Jewish side has responded to this. But for the interest of time, let me just leave it for the published version and skip it, because all I did was try to show how in three basic doctrines in Judaism, where the Tosefta says that the righteous of all nations have a place in the world to come, the 7 commandments of the sons of Noah, and finally the basic doctrine of B'nai Darchei Shalom, for the sake of peace, the Jewish side has really reached out and provided a place for the other, not just Christians, but also pagans. So let me now conclude or continue with what I think is perhaps the central issue of what I want to discuss. It's taken me a long time to get to the central issue, okay? When I was teaching at Southern Methodist University at the Perkins School of Theology in the 70s and early 80s, the popular theological discussion, and I'm sure those of you here remember it, was the conflicting claims of exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. Pluralists like John Hick and Paul Knitter used to come all the time to speak. And my dear friend and mentor, Schubert Ogden, in response to this, and by the way, Schubert is one of the outstanding Protestant theologians. In response to this, he wrote a book, a very important book, which unfortunately has been ignored, called Is There One True Religion or Are There Many? Now here, what Schubert Ogden referred to is an original or foundational covenant that does not in itself constitute either Judaism or Christianity, but is their foundation, and is represented in different directions, such as Judaism and Christianity, and possibly other religions. Ogden sees this as the primordial love of God, as the foundation for any basic or foundational covenant, which is then represented in these different directions. I would like to explicate my own interpretation of Ogden's original insight. But first, I'd like to tell another story, trying to put sense to this, okay? And the reason is because what I'm saying with respect to Schubert Ogden may not be really what Schubert Ogden is saying, okay? I may have misunderstood him. I remember once I was studying with another rabbinical student with a great, great rabbi, Abraham Kronbach, a truly outstanding rabbi. And this other rabbinical student says, Dr. Kronbach, do you mind very much if I take some of your ideas and use them in a sermon and call them my ideas? I was shocked that he would say I would take your ideas and use them and go. Kronbach didn't bat an eye. He said, it's perfectly all right for you to take your ideas and put them in a sermon, and call them your ideas. Take my ideas. Use them as your ideas in a sermon. But please, never, under any circumstances, take your ideas and use them in a sermon and call them my ideas. So I'm basically, I must say I'm somewhat reluctant, to quote Schubert. I have to call him after this and say, look, Schubert, this is what I did. What do you think? He's a wonderful human being. Anyhow, now, I think the way I would explicate my own interpretation of Ogden's original insight is that the original covenant or foundational covenant embodies to me a teaching that enables us to distinguish between the true holy and the false holy. The ethical cannot be separated from the sacred, nor the sacred from the ethical. And that it is not only through the recognition of the one unique God who created all human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity and integrity. This dignity and integrity must be respected through our love of our fellow human beings. It is this that is the foundation. Now, the original foundational covenant embodies all those elements that are recognized in the great ethical and moral religious teachings of the Hebrew Bible. We have here the love of God, the love of our fellow human beings. We have the prophet Micah's injunction. It has been told you, O humanity, what is good and what the Lord doth require of you, but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. It is here where Jeremiah says, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, nor let the strong man glory in his strength, nor let the rich man glory in his riches, but he who glories, glory in this, that I am the Lord, exercising loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, says the Lord. It is embodied in Isaiah's statement, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war anymore. Yechezkel Kaufman, commenting on Isaiah here, says, murder is a crime, but war is not. But there will come a time, with the full realization of humanity, that war itself will be a crime. This state of peace is clearly stated by the prophet Micah when he says, let each man sit under his vine and under his fig tree and none shall make him afraid. It is embodied in Isaiah's statement, what is the fast or deprivation that I have chosen? To share your bread with the hungry, that you bring to your house the poor, that are cast out. When you see the naked, that you cover him and not hide from your own flesh. And Herman Cohen has interpreted this, your own flesh, that's your fellow human being, the poor, the needy, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. All these are elements of the foundational covenant which has been represented and recognized in different directions. And in one direction through Torah, the rabbinic teachings, and the Jewish tradition, and in another direction, the New Testament, the church, and its magisterium, the saints and sages, and in fact, it's what is taught here at this university. It is this foundational covenant that is being represented in both directions. I sometimes think that Plato is to the Western philosophical tradition what the Hebrew Bible is to the Western religious tradition. Let us now consider again the question of exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. And here's where I think I disagree with my dear friend Schubert. In my opinion, exclusivism must be retained, since our religious traditions have a history, integrity, authority, liturgy, and credibility. Just think of the Dominican order that will be celebrating its 800th birthday. To expect that such a tradition should be watered down to accommodate the beliefs of other religions seems to me to be completely mistaken. I cannot stress this enough. What should be done is that all faiths should remove the negative aspects of exclusivity, the view that claims that we are right and everyone else is wrong, an invidious contrast where we want to feel good at the expense of somebody else, viewing one's own religion as embodying the children of light and the other religion as being children of darkness. What I've tried to show is that what has happened since Vatican II is an earnest effort on the part of the Catholic Church to find value in other religions, especially Judaism, to the point of the statement in the Pontifical Biblical document that without the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament would be indecipherable. Not only has Vatican II striven to find elements of value in other traditions, but in an unfortunately neglected conference entitled Spiritual Resources of Peace, which Archbishop Fitzgerald sponsored, a new set was staged. And let me summarize. I have it here, but I want to summarize. What he said is that our scriptures and traditions are the most important spiritual resources each of us possess. But what we have to do is recognize that these resources, these traditions, have been used in ways that actually have been destructive of other religions and exclusive of other religions. And what we cannot do is ignore such passages which have often been misinterpreted or manipulated for unworthy goals, such as power, wealth, or revenge. So what we have to recognize are new contextual studies and deeper understanding of our various scriptures that clearly enunciate the message and value of peace for all humanity. And so with these spiritual resources of peace, we can find that we have a foundation by which, in fact, we can work together. My hope, my faith, is that a world at peace is not a dream, but will become a reality, that hatred will disappear from the human heart and among nations, that all human beings can become indeed a blessing to one another. And so let me conclude by doing two things. First, I'd like to say something about the last meeting that Pope John Paul had in New York. He met with a group of Jewish leaders in New York, and he said, we are called upon to be a blessing in the name of our father Abraham. It's quite interesting what he said. He said, our father Abraham was the first leader, the first hero of an idea. Not because of conquest, not because of wealth, He was a hero because he was given the task of being a blessing. And since this is our heritage and this is our task, let us begin by being a blessing to one another. And so all I can say to you is that I'm so gratified that all of you have come here. For me, it's a great blessing, a great blessing. I have no words to express my profound thanks and appreciation for all the too generous laudatio, and you're all witness to that Dean Stipa gave. The Dean is also a dear and cherished friend, a source of wisdom and guidance, not just to our university, but to me personally, as well as to the work of the John Paul II Center and the Berry Fellows Program. We're all grateful for his staunch support. He has participated with us on our trips to Israel and has done everything to help embody the vision that Russ and Angelica Berry had in training future leaders, primarily Catholic leaders, to serve as ambassadors in a world that increasingly demands interreligious knowledge and cooperation. I also want to thank Father Adam for his friendship and support, for his wisdom in helping our university in so many various ways. And we're so proud of Father Adam that he's been elevated to a high calling in the court. Congratulations. My sincere thanks are given as well to Acting Rector Michael Carragher, who spoke so kindly in his introduction, and to the Faculty Council, the University Faculty Senate, and of course to the Master of the Dominican Order, Father Cadore, the Grand Chancellor of this university. Deep gratitude is also due, of course, to Pope Francis. I would be remiss I would be remiss if I didn't also thank Father Agius, who invited me many years ago after a luncheon where we spent an hour and a half discussing the Bible. He said, come and teach at the Angelicum, and that's what got me here. I also want to thank Father Bliss, who for many years was a champion of interreligious understanding and assisted at our program. At this time also, I express my gratitude to Father Pugliese for his great support and friendship, literally over 25 years, and to praise his remarkable work at the Centro Pro Unione. I am in debt. I'm also in debt to Professor Joseph Sievers, who's also here, past director of the Baer Center and a moving force with the Focolare. His immense knowledge of Josephus has always been at my disposal whenever I was questioning, unclear, and not sure how to read Josephus. Professor Sievers, thank you. It would be a great omission if I didn't also express great thanks to one of the unsung heroes in interreligious activities, Father Remy Hoekma, who was a dear and cherished friend, who worked with me over a number of years and was instrumental in many of the documents that appeared under the wise leadership of Cardinal Cassidy. A special word of appreciation, however, needs to be said here on this unprecedented occasion to the vision, the insight, and the dedication of Angelica Berry. Without her, none of this could have happened. Without her steadfast support and original ideas, we would not have as successful a program as we have, and we have a really successful program. Just to pay tribute to her, I want to mention one of her ideas, because she's too modest to say it publicly, which was most important. It was she who suggested that we put ads in the Israeli paper on the occasion when Pope Benedict and Pope Francis visited Israel. We ran 4 pages with over 420 endorsing signatures of rabbis and Jewish leaders. There was only 420 because the deadline came. We had over 500. These were signatures welcoming Pope Francis to Israel. This was Angelica's idea, and we're very grateful for it. And what can I say about my dear, wonderful friend, Professor Adam Afterman, who is like a son to me. He has brought such love and devotion to our fellows program. We owe him tremendous gratitude. My dear friend, Dr. Anthony Sinera, who's been a continuing source of support when he was president of Sacred Heart University, worked with me on interreligious issues, and now is the president of our Center for Interreligious Understanding. I'm very grateful to the Dominican Order for establishing the conditions, and this I want to say most seriously, for proper theological investigation. I'll say a little bit more about that later. This year we're celebrating the 800th anniversary of the Dominican Order. Its founder, St. Dominic, clearly established its theological character by insisting that priests who preach should understand what they're teaching and that what they teach be authoritative and credible, thus setting the essence of theological investigation, which is to establish the meaning and the truth of the commitment of faith. This tradition was expressed in the most profound and comprehensive manner by St. Thomas Aquinas. My great teacher and friend Hans Jonas advised me when I was teaching Jewish philosophy in the rabbinical school in New York. He said, "Look and see how Aquinas was able, in his differences with Maimonides, to counteract in Maimonides an all too rigid rationalism, and to clarify a number of ambiguities that without Aquinas' help, we would not know how to resolve." I learned that, and I am grateful for that. In this respect, I want to thank my dear friend, Father Bruce Williams, who taught here for many years, and who allowed me to sit on his classes, and often at lunch and over coffee gave me of his profound knowledge of Aquinas. Profound knowledge of Aquinas. I will always cherish those days. Most recently, I want to also thank Father Elul. When I had questions about Islam or anything having to do with the contemporary situation, he was always at my disposal and spoke absolutely with such knowledge about the situation. I have been extremely fortunate to study at a time when many of the greatest scholars from Europe were saved by and brought to the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. There I was exposed to Professor Eric Werner, Isaiah Sonne, Matt Savat, who, by the way, introduced me to the great biblical scholar Yechezkel Kaufman, and we're very fortunate that we have Professor Knoll here, who has the Kaufman Chair at the Hebrew University. And I can only say, I couldn't wait last semester to sit in on every one of his classes. He is just a gift to all of us, and I'm so grateful that you've returned to teach our students. Most of all, I'm indebted to Ellis Rifkin for the methodology of historical investigation, and to Samuel Atlas in philosophy. It was Samuel Atlas that wrote his doctoral dissertation on Hermann Cohen's philosophy of history. And he was the one that introduced me to Hermann Cohen, who has been the greatest influence of my thinking and my philosophical speculation. My study of Cohen was later expanded when I taught at the Hebrew Union College in New York by the dean of the rabbinical school, Henry Slonimsky. Henry Slonimsky wrote his dissertation under Cohen, and he gave me enormous help in understanding the great, great teaching of Hermann Cohen. I cannot tell you how completely gratified I am that Professor Gianna Gigliotti and Professor Andrea Coma are here today, the two of the most foremost authorities on Hermann Cohen in the world today. I'm only sorry that Irene Kajan, who's also knowledgeable on Hermann Cohen, wasn't able to be here today. Last but not least, I want to express my enormous debt to the 30-year friendship and mentorship of Hans Jonas. He was like a father to me, and his work on Gnosticism had not only made a tremendous impact on contemporary studies, but he actually refashioned the entire study of the subject. And it is truly awe-inspiring, and to this day gives us tremendous understanding of that particular period. There's a rabbinic statement that says, "I have learned much from my teachers and much from my colleagues, but most of all from my students." I'm a little emotional. In the many years that I have taught here, I have hundreds of students, many of whom I'm still in contact with, and I cherish their friendship and glory in their achievements. It's wonderful to know, Galileo said something beautifully. He said, "A teacher is not a teacher unless he's surpassed by his disciples." And I feel I'm very much surpassed by so many of my disciples, and I'm grateful to them. And I cannot help but thank this great university. They have been nothing but a source of great blessing to me, and by the honor that they have bestowed upon me. Thank you.